Good morning. I was 6 years old and I don't recall hearing any discussions about my step-grandfather, Victor Francis. During that time, Victor Charles would pop in and out the beach house and he would rush out to meet his friends. We would also see Auntie Susie and Carl in their two-story beachfront house, and seeing the rock jetties stretching in the Pacific Ocean, and when looking to the right, it was beautiful La Jolla Hills. We all tried our best to live a normal life, while newspapers were printed the name of Victor Francis Buono. Victor Charles worked in 2 television programs in 1959. His first performance was in the Western Bronco titled Night Train to Denver. His role was Man on Train, and it was released on December 29, 1959. His second performance was in 77 Sunset Strip, titled Created He Them. This time he had the substantial speaking role as Bongo Benny, and it was released on January 1st, 1960. It makes perfect sense that these 2 television programs in 1959 were cast, filmed, and edited before Victor Charles performed in the Old Globe Theatre Shakespearean Festival on July 7th, 1959. That most likely was the time period when Victor Charles received his equity card and became a professional actor. The Old Globe Theatre Shakespearean Festival ended on August 30th, 1959, and Victor Charles most likely went back up to Warner Brothers during September through December of 1959 to film 3 new television programs. The first television program in the 1960 decade was Sea Hunt, titled Underwater Drop, and he played the role of Seminard. It was released on February 6, 1960. His second program was GE Theater titled The Story of Judith, and he played the role of Bagoas. It was released on February 28, 1960. And his third television program was Worldwide 60, titled The Immense Design, and he was the host. It was released on March 26, 1960, and at the end of the year of 1959, Victor Charles was on his way to be a professional television actor, and he never looked back again at his family crisis for the rest of his life. My father, Sonny, was 31 years old and still a San Diego County sheriff in 1959. He once told me long ago in 1982 that he went to the San Diego County Jail to talk with his stepfather, Victor Francis, face to face, after he was first arrested on February 3rd, 1959. He went there for one important reason, and it was to hear him say he was innocent of all charges placed against him. As he sat there looking at his stepfather, asking him if he was innocent of his charges, Victor Francis calmly said, "I'm innocent." At the end of their short conversation and polite goodbyes, my father walked away with his head hanging low and crying, because he knew inside that he was guilty. This is what was going on behind the curtain of the Buono family in 1959. All the rest of the family members were working at their jobs and taking care of their houses and families and trying to forget this horrific, surreal situation. Victor Charles was now a professional actor who was financially providing support for my Grandma Mert and Uncle David Francis. And the newspapers continued printing about the death of Tony Mirabile. Over the years, I've read many books of actors, actresses, directors, playwriters, screenwriters, and producers of stage, television, and motion pictures. In the early years of MGM, 20th Century Fox, Paramount Pictures, Warner Brothers, and many more studios had stringent policies not to ever bring any potential talents up for a screen test if they were carrying any controversial luggage following them. The name Victor Francis Buono had appeared in numerous newspapers throughout America and across the border of Canada, and people had read about the robbery and murder of Tony Mirabile. Victor Charles was 100% innocent of his father's crimes, and the studios made his family crisis an absolute secret from motion picture fans throughout his entire career as an actor. In 1959, these are the family members connected to actor Victor Charles Buono. It was my Grandma Mert, David Francis, Tony Edwards, Annie Susie, Carl Brittenbach, Uncle Malvin Ward Morris, Auntie Mary Jane Morris, Larry, Vicky, and Carla Morris, Granny Gruntz, Great-Grandpa Pete Budovich, my father Sonny, my mother Hilda, and two sisters, Teresa and Renee, and me, and my mother's father John Allen and his wife, Laura Golden, and her brother David Golden, and her half-brother Uncle Lynn, and his wife Mother Golden, and his wife Mary Golden, and their two sons Steve and John, and Uncle Ken Brown, and his wife Agnes, and their son Neil and daughter Laura. This was the surrounding family members who had to endure in this tragic episode of the Buono family. My step-grandfather, Victor Francis, was not all alone, because everyone who loved him in the family had to take the same ride with him through his tragic downfall of his now crushed life. Most of our family members were hard-working people, like my father Sonny as a San Diego County sheriff. Carl Brittenbach was a carpenter. Uncle Lynn Golden was a construction crane operator. His father, John Allen Golden, was a construction contractor. My Uncle Ken Brown was a milkman. And my Uncle Ward Morris was an independent construction contractor. I was now 6 years old, and I don't recall hearing any discussions about step-grandfather Victor Francis from the adults sitting around me. During that time, Victor Charles would pop in and out in a rush to meet up with his friends. We would also walk across Mission Boulevard to see Annie Susie and Carl at their two-story beachfront house. When looking out their second-story window, we could see the rock jetty stretching out into the Pacific Ocean, and when looking to our right, there were beautiful hills of La Jolla. And we all tried our best to live a normal life while newspapers continued printing the name of Victor Francis Buono. On August 30th, 1959, Victor Charles would be performing in the last day of the Oak Globe Theatre Shakespeare Festival. He was well on his way to being a television and motion picture actor, while his father was in jail waiting for his verdict of being found innocent or guilty of the death of Tony Mirabile. This is a very sad story of two men going in opposite paths. Victor Charles was making Hollywood history, while his father was submerging in absolute shame. The Chinese drip drops steadily kept coming from the newspapers in September, and I've always wondered if Victor Charles ever visited his father while he was incarcerated. There are so many questions at that tragic time that cannot ever be answered easily after being buried deeply in the hearts and minds. The trial jury of 10 women and 2 men still couldn't come to a decision after 8 weeks, and on September 13, 1959, the title in the newspaper read, "Mirabile Plot Jury Locked Up in Hotel." The jury couldn't come to a verdict, but 3 days later, the shocking news was printed in hundreds or maybe thousands of newspapers throughout America that the jury had finally come to their decision saying, "For guilty of murder in slaying of Mirabile." And 9 days later, on September 27, 1959, in the newspaper, it stated, "Forgiven life imprisonment of Tony Mirabile's death." Fate is an unpredictable reality, and if Victor Francis Buono knew of the ramifications before his crimes, I strongly believe he wouldn't have made all of his wrong decisions in his later life. His decade of the 1950s brought him separation from his family, his freedom, his dignity that he once carried proudly as being a husband, father, San Diego police officer, and Bell's bondsman, owner. I truly wish I had known my step-grandfather, Victor Francis, better, because I know he had wonderful characteristics that were good. And I've always remembered the days when he took me to Belmont Park so I could ride on the wooden roller coaster overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Victor Charles Buono was 20 years old at the closing of 1959, and he was now a professional equity actor performing in Warner Brothers television programs. He would never be looked upon as he once was before, because he had entered into the magical world of creative make-believe that was broadcasting him in numerous television sets throughout of America. He had become a phenomenon to most of his family members as well. For the world he once walked in was now gone forever, and he was now untouchable to many others who have loved him since the day he was born.